America is famous as the land of freedom. You can say almost anything, drive hundreds of miles just to eat one specific sandwich, and proudly call it a road trip. But that same America also has hunting and fishing laws that make you stop and ask, wait, why does this need to be written down? Why is it illegal to wake up a sleeping bear just to take a photo? Why is catching a fish with your mouth considered a crime? The answer is very simple. The more specific the law, the more likely someone has already done exactly that. This video isn't here to call anyone stupid, and it's not making things up for laughs. Some of these laws are still active, some are outdated, but every single one was real enough that someone at some point had to sit down and officially write it into law. These are 31 laws, 31 stories, and the final law will make you laugh because you'll suddenly think, oh, that explains everything. Story 1. Waking up a sleeping bear for a photo is illegal, Alaska. In Alaska, there's a law that sounds exactly like a reminder from an adult who is deeply spiritually exhausted by humanity. You are not allowed to wake up a sleeping bear just to take a picture. Not don't tease the bear. Not don't feed the bear. Just please don't wake it up for fun. This law exists because someone at some point actually stood in front of a several hundred-pound bear sleeping peacefully and thought this would do numbers on Instagram. So they got closer, very close. Close enough to believe they could outrun an animal that can move about as fast as a motorcycle. The authorities in Alaska looked at this chain of decisions and realized something important. This was no longer a wildlife issue. The law sounds like it's meant to protect bears, but in reality it was written to protect humans from their own extreme overconfidence. Story 2. Hunting is illegal in cemeteries, Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, there's a law that sounds like it shouldn't need to exist at all. Hunting is prohibited in cemeteries. Most people hear this and have the exact same reaction. Wait, who would hunt there? And that question is precisely why the law exists. In a very uniquely human moment, someone once saw a deer running past rows of gravestones and successfully convinced themselves, this is basically a forest, just quieter, empty space, very few people around, and a target moving calmly between stone markers. At that point, the state of Pennsylvania had to step in, not to protect the deer, but to remind everyone of something extremely basic. A cemetery is a place for remembrance, not a place to line up a shot. This law isn't philosophical. It's simply an official announcement from the government. Please let the dead rest. And maybe don't get too creative while you're alive. Story 3. Getting fish drunk is illegal, Ohio. In Ohio, there's a law that sounds exactly like the title of a bar joke. Getting fish drunk is illegal. Not banning fishing, not banning alcohol, but banning the act of giving alcohol to fish to make them easier to catch. The fact that someone once sat down and seriously thought, what if we just get it drunk first, was enough for authorities to realize this needed to be officially written down. With very human logic, someone believed that if a fish got drunk, it would swim slower, have worse reflexes, and be much easier to grab. It sounds clever. It also sounds exactly like a plan invented after the third beer. Ohio looked at the mental image of underwater drinking parties where fish unwillingly become guests and said, no, we're not doing that. This law isn't about protecting the moral integrity of fish. It exists to remind people that hunting and fishing are sports, not a drinking session, where you decide to drag river creatures into the party. Story 4. Hunting Bigfoot is illegal, Washington. In the state of Washington, there's a law that sounds exactly like the opening of a late-night documentary. Hunting Bigfoot is illegal. Yes, Bigfoot. The giant hairy creature that half of America believes is real and the other half believes is just a neighbor in a costume. This law officially treats Bigfoot as a protected being. If it exists and you shoot it, you've committed a crime. And if it doesn't exist, you still don't get to shoot the thing you think is Bigfoot. In other words, in every possible scenario, pulling the trigger is a bad idea. Washington authorities looked at blurry reports, oversized footprints, and people who were far too confident while wandering the woods at night and decided we don't need another "I swear I saw it" story ending with a gunshot. This law doesn't confirm that Bigfoot is real. It only confirms one very clear thing: if you think you just saw Bigfoot, the safest move is to lower the gun. Story 5. Fishing in pajamas is illegal, Chicago. In Chicago, there's a fashion law. No designer would ever put their name on fishing in public while wearing pajamas is illegal. Not because pajamas are dangerous, but because too many people decided that a public lake was basically an extension of their living room. With very strong weekend morning logic, someone stepped outside in full pajamas, fishing rod in hand, and thought, "I'll just be out here for a minute. No one will notice." But then it happened again, and again, from one person to the next, until Chicago officials had to step in to protect a very fragile concept called public space. This law isn't meant to insult pajamas. It's just a reminder that there's an invisible line between relaxing at home and appearing in public. And even if the fish never complained, Chicago decided if you're going to fish, at least wear pants like an adult. Story 6. Catching fish with your mouth is illegal, Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, fishing laws draw a very clear line. Catching fish with your hands is allowed, but using your mouth is not. It sounds strange until you remember that humans are not bears. This law exists because someone once looked into the water and thought the fastest way is just to bend down and bite. No fishing rod, no bait, just absolute faith in their own teeth. The problem is fish are slippery, the water is cold, and a fish's reflexes are always faster than human confidence. Pennsylvania authorities looked at that mental image and decided to establish an evolutionary boundary. Hands are fine, mouths are not. This law isn't an insult to the wild spirit. It's simply a gentle reminder that humans invented tools for a reason. And thankfully, dentists don't need to be involved in your weekend fishing plans. Story 7. Shooting a deer while it's swimming is illegal. There is a very specific moment in the hunting world when a deer steps into the water and starts swimming across a river. At that exact moment, by law, it becomes untouchable. The law prohibits shooting a deer while it is swimming across a river or a lake, because at that point it no longer has any way to defend itself. It can't run, it can't dodge. All it can do is keep swimming and hope humans behave decently. Legally speaking, the water suddenly becomes a temporary shield, a neutral zone, a safe area granted by nature itself. At some point, someone probably saw a deer slowly swimming and thought that should be an easier shot. And that is exactly when the law entered the conversation. This rule isn't complicated, and it isn't philosophical. It simply reminds us that hunting isn't about waiting for the weakest possible moment. Sometimes fair play is as simple as waiting for it to reach the shore first. Story 8. Whaling is illegal in a landlocked state, Utah. Utah is known for deserts, red rock formations, and salt lakes. What Utah does not have is an ocean. And yet, in a very serious and official way, the law here clearly states whaling is prohibited. At first glance, it sounds like an administrative joke. But to the legal system, there's nothing funnier than leaving a loophole open, even one that requires a very strong imagination. This law doesn't exist because Utah once had whales. It exists because someone thought, but what if someone claimed they were hunting a whale on land? What if someone tried to argue that something kind of looks like a whale? And what if the law didn't say otherwise? So Utah chose the safest option. Write it into the law, just in case. No ocean, no whales, still no whaling. The law isn't always smart. Story 9. Using drones to locate game is illegal, Oregon. In Oregon, hunting laws send a very clear message: don't bring flying technology into the forest. More specifically, you're not allowed to use drones to locate animals before a hunt. Because hunting is not supposed to be a remote-controlled game with extra batteries in your backpack. This law came into existence the moment people started thinking, if I can shoot 4K video from above, why bother with tracks, wind direction, or actual skill? Just one button, one screen, and a weak Wi-Fi signal deep in the woods. Oregon looked at the future where hunters sit in folding chairs, sipping coffee, eyes glued to a tablet, like they're watching a reality show about forest deer, and said no. That's not how this works. This law doesn't hate technology. It just hates turning hunting into an outdoor version of an arcade shooting game. In Oregon, if you want to find game, you have to use the most classic tools in the world: your eyes, your legs, and the ability to walk in the wrong direction for several hours. Story 10. Using machine guns to catch fish is illegal, Wyoming. In Wyoming, fishing laws have to clarify one thing that movies have seriously confused. You are not allowed to use guns to catch fish. And just to make sure no one pretends to misunderstand the law, adds one more detail: machine guns are also not allowed. Clearly, at some point, someone looked down at a river and thought, if I fire fast enough, something has to get hit. Maybe they had just finished an action movie. Maybe they trusted Hollywood a little too much. The problem is, fish don't stay still. Water doesn't stay still. And firing bullets into a river creates a lot of noise. Very little dinner and a lot of questions from wildlife officers. Wyoming looked at that scenario and decided to write the rule plainly. Fishing is an activity that requires patience, not a climactic action scene. Movies can exaggerate everything. But in real life, if you need military-grade firepower to catch a fish, the problem probably isn't the fish. Story 11. Whaling is illegal in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a state with many things. Grasslands, endless highways, and a sky so wide it makes you question your life choices. What Oklahoma does not have is an ocean. Which is why the fact that it has a law banning whaling sounds exactly like an administrative joke. But the law is still there. Clear, serious, no fine print, no footnotes. Maybe it was copied from somewhere and someone forgot to delete it. Maybe a government official thought better safe than sorry. Or maybe they imagined a scenario no one ever wanted to explain later. Whatever the reason, the result is very clear. If by some miracle you claim to be hunting whales in Oklahoma, you are breaking the law. This law isn't here to protect whales from Oklahomans. It exists to protect the legal system from a very dangerous question. Wait, does the law actually ban this? And Oklahoma answered in advance, yes. Story 12. Fishing with birds is illegal in New York. In New York, fishing laws include a rule that sounds a lot like a labor clause. Using trained birds to catch fish is prohibited. In other words, you're not allowed to hire employees with wings to do the work for you. In theory, the idea sounds pretty smart. You stand on the shore, hands clean, coffee still hot, while the bird dives into the water, grabs a fish, and delivers it straight to you. Efficient, elegant, and completely unfair. New York authorities looked at that scenario and decided to call the problem by its real name, cheating. Because hunting and fishing are meant to test human skill, not turn into a competition of who has the better support team. This law doesn't hate birds. It just hates turning a fishing trip into an outsourcing operation. In New York, if you want to catch a fish, you have to do it yourself. No living drones, no flying assistants. Just you, a fishing rod, and patience being tested 1 minute at a time. Story 13. Eating roadkill is legal Tennessee. In Tennessee, there's a law that makes the line between food and traffic accident uncomfortably thin. Eating roadkill is legal. Yes, if a deer or similar animal is hit by a car, and you get to it before cleanup crews do, you're allowed to take it home. But the law is very clear about the most important part. It's only legal if you are not the person who caused the accident. Because otherwise, this stops being about avoiding waste and starts looking extremely suspicious. The law exists for practical reasons. Reduce waste, keep roads clear, and provide an extra food source for those who need it. Sounds reasonable. Until you're actually standing on the side of the road looking down at a perfectly still deer and asking yourself, so, I'm really doing this fast, efficient, legal? And also, the exact moment many people realize just because something is legal doesn't mean it feels great to put it in your trunk. Story 14. Using a live turkey as bait is illegal Kentucky. In Kentucky, hunting laws draw a very clear moral line. You are not allowed to use a live turkey to lure other turkeys. Fake decoys are fine. Plastic ones, foam ones, even high-tech decoys are acceptable. But decoys that can breathe are not. This law exists because someone once decided that tying up a live turkey and letting it call its friends over was a reasonable strategy. In terms of effectiveness, maybe. In terms of ethics, absolutely not. Kentucky looked at that scenario and stepped in not because it felt bad for the turkeys being hunted, but because it refused to accept turning one animal into an unwilling trader. Even in hunting, there are lines you don't cross. This law isn't complicated. It simply says that if you're going to hunt, do it properly. Don't force a turkey to play Judas for the entire flock. Story 15. Hunting butterflies under streetlights is illegal Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, a city famous for traffic jams, expensive housing, and very big problems, the law still found time to deal with a threat no less serious. Hunting butterflies under streetlights is illegal. Yes, butterflies. And yes, streetlights. The law prohibits capturing insects attracted to public lighting, because according to authorities, that's simply too easy. A butterfly circling under a 60-watt street lamp is not a worthy opponent. That's not hunting. That's exploiting the city's lighting system. At some point, someone probably stood under a lamp late at night, arm raised high, very proud of their catch. And that was the moment the law decided to step in. This rule isn't about saving butterflies from extinction. It exists to protect a very basic idea of fairness. Because if you need an entire urban infrastructure to beat a butterfly, the problem probably isn't the butterfly. Story 16. Using ferrets to hunt is illegal West Virginia. In West Virginia, hunting laws had to step in against a force that was simply too effective: ferrets. Yes, small, long, fast animals that can dive into burrows like they were born for exactly that job. And precisely because of that, they're banned. Before this law existed, someone looked at a deep burrow and thought, what if I just let a ferret handle the hard part? The result was predictable. The ferret went in. The animal panicked and ran out. And the human stood outside collecting the reward like they were watching a tactical unit do all the work. West Virginia saw this and said, no, this is hunting, not outsourcing. This law doesn't hate ferrets. It just refuses to turn hunting into a coordinated operation with a furry strike force. Because if that were allowed, the next step would probably be tiny helmets, mini radios, and a team meeting before launch. The furry special forces were officially disbanded. Story 17. Fishing while riding a giraffe is illegal, Idaho. In Idaho, fishing laws include a sentence that makes people stop and read it twice. You are not allowed to fish while riding a giraffe. Not a horse, not a mule, a giraffe. Naturally, the question appears immediately. Hold on, why is this so specific? And that is the familiar sign of the law at work. The more specific the rule, the more concerning the reason behind it. Idaho isn't known for African savannas. It's not known for giraffes wandering along riverbanks. And yet somehow lawmakers felt the need to clarify that even if you happen to own a giraffe, it is not an acceptable mode of transportation for fishing. The law doesn't explain why. It doesn't need to. Because once a sentence like that has to exist in legal text, the real priority becomes very simple: making sure it never happens again. Story 18. Using trail cameras for hunting is illegal, Arizona. In Arizona, hunting laws have to say one thing out loud: that technology has made many people forget the forest is not a surveillance system. That's why using trail cameras to track animals before a hunt is illegal. The idea sounds very modern. Set up a few cameras. Wait for motion alerts. Review the footage like you're watching a reality show called Keeping Up with the Deer. But Arizona looked at the scenario of hunters sitting at home scrolling through footage, rewinding to the moment a deer passed by at 2:17 a.m., then scheduling a perfectly timed visit, and said, no, that's not hunting. This law isn't anti-technology. It just opposes turning hunting into a data analysis project. Because hunting has always been about tracks, wind direction, and patience, not memory cards, power banks, and cinematic camera angles. In Arizona, if you want to find game, you have to actually go into the forest, not log in. Story 19. Wrestling a bear is illegal, Alabama. In Alabama, there's a law where the title alone explains everything. Organizing wrestling matches between humans and bears is illegal. Not circus performances, not training, but actual wrestling with an audience and at least one very confident person. This law exists because someone once looked at a bear weighing several hundred pounds packed with muscle and sharp claws and thought, yeah, I've got this. Maybe they had just won a weekend wrestling match. Maybe they had a little too much to drink. Or maybe they dramatically overestimated humans and seriously underestimated the concept of wild animal. Alabama looked at that chain of decisions and decided to step in. Not only to protect the bears, but to stop humans from voluntarily turning themselves into a live demonstration of survival lessons. This law isn't philosophical, and it doesn't overthink things. It states one very clear point: if you need a law to tell you not to wrestle a bear, that law absolutely deserves to exist. Story 20. Shooting rabbits from a motorboat is illegal, Kansas. In Kansas, hunting laws include a sentence that already feels a bit off-topic. Shooting rabbits while on a motorboat is prohibited. The issue isn't the boat, and it's not exactly the gun. The issue is this: rabbits do not live in the water, and that's precisely what makes this law even more interesting. Somehow, at some point, someone was driving a boat down a river, looked toward the bank, saw a rabbit running by, and thought, yeah, I can take that shot from here. Maybe they didn't want to leave the boat. Maybe they seriously overestimated their ability to coordinate moving water with accurate aim. Kansas looked at that scenario and decided to make the rule very clear. Not to protect rabbits, but to protect the basic idea of reasonable hunting. This law doesn't explain why you would be on a boat while hunting rabbits. It simply makes sure that if you plan to do that, you're not allowed to. Story 21. Using glue to catch birds is illegal Hawaii. In Hawaii, a place people call paradise, hunting laws have to make one thing very clear. Don't turn trees into sticky traps. Specifically, smearing glue on branches so birds land and get stuck is illegal. Technically speaking, this method is effective. Ethically speaking, it makes an entire island collectively shake its head. This law exists because someone once watched birds land on a branch and thought, if I put glue right here, problem solved, fast, efficient, very low effort, and completely against the spirit of a place known for respecting nature. Hawaii refuses to turn trees into tropical versions of flypaper. Not because birds are too smart, but because the method is considered cruel and deeply unfair. This law doesn't try to overcomplicate things. It simply reminds us of something very basic. If you need industrial-strength glue to beat a bird, the problem probably isn't the bird. Story 22. Shooting buffalo from a second-floor hotel is illegal Texas. In Texas, there's a law that sounds exactly like the opening scene of a Wild West movie. Shooting buffalo from the second floor of a hotel is illegal. Not out on the plains, not on open grassland, but from a hotel window. This law wasn't invented by Hollywood writers. It comes from a very real time when buffalo actually wandered through towns and some people looked out of a second-floor window and thought that's a pretty good angle. Texas, after considering everything, public safety, basic common sense, and the idea that hotels should not double as watchtowers, decided to draw a line. You can hunt, just not from the second floor of a place where other people paid money to take a nap. This law doesn't ban buffalo. It bans creativity taken too far. It sounds like a movie, and that's fair, because it comes from a time when life in Texas was sometimes even more dramatic than the movies. Story 23. Abusing oysters is illegal Maryland. In Maryland, where oysters are practically a cultural symbol, the law had to step in to protect oysters from being mistreated. Yes, the law here requires oysters to be handled properly, and somehow that sounds even stranger than oysters showing up at every single gathering. Not because oysters have feelings. No one thinks oysters get sad happy or need emotional support. The issue is humans. Because once people get their hands on an oyster, they tend to take things a bit too far. Some throw them, some stomp on them. Some treat oysters like a personal enemy in a long-running war from lunch to dinner. Maryland looked at this scene and decided enough. Not to protect the oyster's honor, but to maintain a basic level of order and decency in harvesting practices. This law doesn't require you to handle oysters like fragile eggs. It simply reminds you that even if it's seafood, there's no need to torture it before it ends up on a plate. Story 24. Legally blind people are still allowed to hunt Texas. In Texas, there's a law that makes many people read it twice, just to be sure legally blind individuals are still allowed to hunt. At first glance, it sounds terrifying. But before you picture an action movie-level disaster, take a breath. This law is not encouraging recklessness. It's an accessibility law. A legally blind hunter is only allowed to hunt when accompanied by a licensed guide who stands beside them, takes responsibility for navigation, confirms the target, and ensures everything is done safely. In other words, no one is shooting blindly. The hunter relies on communication coordination and rules that are often stricter than those applied to the average hunter. Texas looked at this issue and said nature should not be a privilege reserved for a few, but safety is not negotiable. The law sounds alarming if you only read the headline, but once you understand it fully, it feels very Texas. Open the door to everyone, as long as it's done the right way by the rules and without turning hunting into a game of chance. Story 25. Catching fish with shoes is illegal Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, fishing laws include a rule that makes everyone stop and think for a second. Catching fish with shoes is illegal. Not gloves, not nets, but shoes. The most interesting part is this. No one is entirely sure what catching fish with shoes actually means. Does it mean pressing a shoe down into the water, using a shoe like a paddle or a net, or throwing an entire pair into the river with absolute confidence? But one thing is very clear, this law exists because someone tried. Oklahoma didn't write this rule out of curiosity. Laws only appear after someone proves that human imagination will always stay one step ahead of legal preparedness. This law doesn't judge. It simply says use tools that were designed to catch fish. Shoes were made for walking, not for participating in the food chain. And if you're wondering why this law even exists, congratulations, you've understood its spirit perfectly. Story 26. Catching fish with bare hands is illegal. Noodling, Indiana. In Indiana, fishing laws decided to step in directly to protect human hands. Catching fish with bare hands, also known as noodling, is illegal. If you're not familiar with noodling, imagine sticking your arm into a dark underwater hole and waiting for something to bite. It sounds very zen, and also deeply terrifying. Supporters of noodling call it a tradition. Indiana looked at that tradition, looked at the amount of bandages involved, and said, no, we stop here. The problem is that inside those holes, fish aren't the only creatures with teeth. Snakes, turtles, and plenty of other things that were never invited to your weekend fishing trip. This law isn't against bravery. It's against using your hands as live bait. Indiana is simply reminding everyone that humans invented fishing rods, nets, and thick gloves for a very clear reason. So your fingers are still intact when you get home for dinner. Story 27. Hunting is prohibited on Sundays. Multiple states. In many U.S. states, hunting laws include a rule that is both clear and oddly polite. Sunday is a day off, not for humans, but for animals. This rule comes from religious tradition, when Sunday was considered a day for church family and meals without the sound of gunfire. By law on this day, guns are meant to stay put away, and wildlife receives a kind of mandatory day off. Technically speaking, animals have no idea what day of the week it is, but the law does. And the law decided that no matter how free your schedule looks, hunting is not on the Sunday agenda. This rule isn't judging anyone. It simply divides time very clearly: 6 days for hunting, 1 day for quiet. In many places, Sunday becomes a rare moment when nature and humans agree to do the same thing together: stop moving for a while. Story 28. Giant punt guns for duck hunting are illegal United States federal law. There was a time in American history when duck hunting wasn't really a sport. It was artillery. A punt gun looked like a rifle that had taken way too many steroids, several meters long, mounted directly onto a boat. And with a single pull of the trigger, it could take down dozens of ducks at once. It sounds efficient. It also sounds like a massive ecological mistake. Federal authorities looked at a person essentially firing a cannon across the water and said, no, this is no longer hunting. The ban on punt guns didn't exist because the guns were too cool. It existed because they were too successful. When one shot can wipe out an entire flock, the idea of skill or fairness completely disappears. This law makes one thing very clear: hunting is meant to be a challenge between humans and nature. Not a battle where you bring military-grade firepower just to put dinner on the table. Story 29. Using a hand-crank phone to electrocute fish is illegal, Kentucky. In Kentucky, fishing laws had to issue a warning that already sounds risky. Just hearing it, using a hand-crank phone to shock fish, is illegal. Yes, a hand-crank phone. The kind you turn to generate electricity and then lower into the water. At this point, most people can already see the problem. The original idea probably sounded creative: crank, the power drop, it in the water, fish get shocked, float up, dinner is solved. But history has shown that electricity and water rarely end well, especially when humans are standing very close to both. Kentucky looked at the chain of possible events: splashing water, exposed wires, someone slipping, and decided not to wait for the ending. This law wasn't written to be funny. It was written to reduce the number of accident reports that make everyone reading them sigh. Not every strange law is meant to amuse. Some are simply the government's polite way of saying, please, don't try this again. Story 30. Hunting camels is illegal, Arizona. In Arizona, there's a law that makes many people blink twice. Hunting camels is illegal. What's confusing is this: Arizona currently has no wild camels, no Sahara-style desert, no herds of camels wandering past the Grand Canyon. And yet the law is still there, very serious. The reason lies in history. In the 19th century, the U.S. military experimented with using camels to travel through the desert. The experiment failed. the camels disappeared, and the law stayed behind. And then no one bothered to remove it. Sometimes the legal system is like an old drawer full of things that once had a purpose and now exist only to remind us that the past was surprisingly creative. This law isn't meant to protect camels from Arizonans. It exists to protect Arizona from the most dangerous legal question of all. Wait, is this allowed? The answer was prepared a very long time ago. Story 31. Catching fish with a lasso is illegal, Tennessee. In Tennessee, fishing laws include a sentence that feels like it shouldn't need to be said. Using a lasso to catch fish is illegal. And then it hits you. If there's a law, someone definitely tried. A lasso was designed for livestock, for cattle, for horses, not for a slippery creature that lives underwater and has absolutely no interest in the concept of standing still while I throw this rope. But with very human logic, someone once looked into a river and thought, if I throw it well enough, this might work. Maybe they were used to being a cowboy. Maybe they didn't feel like carrying a fishing rod. Tennessee looked at the image of a person standing on a riverbank spinning a lasso overhead like they were practicing for a rodeo and decided to make one thing very clear: in the law, fish are not livestock. This rule isn't mocking anyone. It simply shuts down an idea before more people feel the need to test it. Looking back at these 31 stories, one thing becomes very clear. The laws aren't stupid. They only appear after humans prove they can be creative in ways that really should never be tried again. This video isn't here to call anyone foolish, and it's not here to judge. We laugh because we all recognize that moment when someone looks at a risky situation and confidently says, "It'll probably be fine. Now it's your turn." Which law on this list makes you believe without any doubt that someone absolutely did this for real? Leave a comment and share this video with that one friend who always thinks they're immune to consequences. And if you enjoy stories that are both funny and completely true, subscribe to the channel. Trust me, the list of bizarre laws out there is still much longer than our imagination.